Imagine building something for decades, investing billions of dollars, only to have it suddenly taken away overnight. That's exactly what happened in Panama. Without any warning, Panama's Supreme Court ruled that the operating contract for two major ports, run by China's CK Hutchison Group, was unconstitutional and immediately revoked their concession rights. These ports weren't small ventures. Over 30 years, CK Hutchison had poured in more than $4 billion, creating modern terminals, automated systems, and thousands of jobs. Suddenly, all of that investment, planning, and labor seems erased with a single legal stroke. So why would Panama take such a drastic step? And what does this have to do with the world's two biggest powers, the United States and China? On the surface, it might look like a local legal dispute, but dig deeper, and you see a clash of sovereignty, international business, and great power politics playing out on a tiny but strategically vital stage. In today's story, we'll unpack how a small country with outsized importance just shook the foundations of global trade. We'll explore why these ports matter, how U.S. influence may have pushed Panama's hand, and how China is retaliating in ways that could ripple across the world. This is more than a legal case, it's a geopolitical shockwave. To understand why this port seizure is such a big deal, we first need to look at Panama itself. On a map, Panama might seem like just a thin strip of land connecting Central and South America, bordered by Costa Rica to the west and Colombia to the east. Its population and land area aren't huge, and economically, it's not one of the heavyweights of the region. But here's the catch. Panama controls one of the most important waterways on Earth, the Panama Canal. Stretching about 80 kilometers, this canal is a shortcut connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Before it existed, ships traveling between the coasts of the Americas had to sail all the way around the southern tip of South America, a detour of roughly 15,000 kilometers. Today, around 13,000 vessels pass through the canal every year, carrying oil, gas, grain, minerals, and consumer goods. That's about 5 to 6% of all global shipping. Economically, the Panama Canal is a gold mine. Toll revenues bring in roughly $5 billion annually, with net profits around $3 billion, a major source of fiscal stability for the country. Think of Panama as a small gatekeeper holding one of the world's most valuable keys. Control over this narrow strip of land gives it power far beyond its size, because what happens in Panama can ripple across global trade and supply chains. So, while Panama may look small, the stakes here are massive. Whoever controls access to the canal, and the ports that flank it, has influence over global shipping routes, commerce, and even strategic military considerations. This sets the stage for why the Chinese ports and their sudden seizure are more than just a local news story. They're a flashpoint in international geopolitics. Now that we understand why Panama is so strategically important, let's zoom in on the real prize. The two Chinese-operated ports that sit like bookends at the canal. On the Pacific side, there's the Port of Balboa, and on the Atlantic side, the Port of Cristobal. If you look at a map, they almost look like handles gripping the canal, controlling the entry and exit points for one of the busiest maritime corridors in the world. These ports aren't small operations. They're massive modern hubs. The CK Hutchison Group, a Chinese company, has invested over $4 billion over 30 years into building terminals, upgrading equipment, and automating operations. Their investments transform the ports into critical logistics centers handling about 8 million TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent units, annually, making them the largest port cluster in Central America. Beyond numbers, these ports are vital for Panama's economy. They directly provide about 9,000 jobs, with tens of thousands more indirectly employed through shipping, warehousing, and related services. Tax revenues and port-related insurance also feed into the national budget, making these hubs an essential part of Panama's economic framework. Now imagine this: decades of careful planning, massive investments, and complex infrastructure, all suddenly threatened by a single Supreme Court ruling. Overnight, the operations that anchored Panama's shipping economy were in jeopardy. This is more than a legal dispute. It's a strategic shock that affects trade, employment, and Panama's role in global shipping. These ports weren't just business assets, they were China's foothold in a critical choke point, enabling trade influence, economic leverage, and geopolitical positioning. To understand why Panama suddenly moved against C.K. Hutcherson, we have to look beyond local courts and politics. The shadow of U.S. influence looms large over the canal. For decades, the United States has treated the Panama Canal as a strategic national asset, not just a waterway. Former President Donald Trump made this crystal clear during his campaign and presidency, repeatedly calling the canal vital to American national security. In early 2025, Trump refused to rule out military action to reclaim the canal, framing China's involvement as a direct threat to U.S. interests. Even after leaving the campaign trail, his statements at the inauguration and in policy speeches emphasized the need for reasserting American control, linking Panama's ports directly to broader U.S.-China competition. The United States didn't stop at words. Between late 2025 and early 2026, American authorities seized Venezuelan oil tankers, 5 of which were registered under the Panamanian flag, signaling real-world consequences for Panama if it didn't align with U.S. preferences. These actions weren't random. They applied pressure on Panama's government, reshaping domestic politics and creating a sense of urgency to act against foreign, meaning Chinese, influence. The key takeaway here is that small states like Panama often find their sovereignty squeezed between global superpowers. The Supreme Court's ruling, while framed as a domestic legal decision, cannot be fully separated from international pressure. Panama's leadership faced a choice: defy the U.S. and risk political, economic, and strategic fallout, or act swiftly against Chinese operations to maintain favor. On January 29, 2026, Panama's Supreme Court made a ruling that sent shockwaves through global trade. It declared C.K. Hutcherson's lease and operation of the Balboa and Cristobal ports unconstitutional. Overnight, decades of investment and planning, over $4 billion poured into modern terminals, automation, and infrastructure, were suddenly at risk. What makes this seizure particularly striking is how abrupt and uncompensated it was. There was virtually no prior warning, no negotiation, and no discussion of compensation. The automatic 25-year contract extension, meant to run through 2047, was voided immediately. For C.K. Hutcherson, it wasn't just a legal setback. It was a massive disruption of operations and long-term strategy. For China, the stakes were even higher. These ports were critical nodes in Latin American trade and investment, and losing control threatened both economic influence and strategic positioning. To visualize the impact, imagine building a state-of-the-art shopping mall over 30 years, only to have a court suddenly declare it illegal and hand the keys to someone else. Every dollar invested, every job created, every contract signed, suddenly uncertain. C.K. Hutcherson had built 8 million TEUs of annual throughput, created over 9,000 direct jobs, and contributed significantly to Panama's port economy. All of that was now in limbo. This decisive action didn't just shake Panama's port sector, it escalated tensions with China. The world watched as one of the key Chinese investments in the Americas faced sudden expropriation, raising questions about investment security, legal predictability, and geopolitical leverage. China didn't sit idle after Panama's sudden port seizure. Almost immediately, Beijing began a series of carefully calculated responses aimed at protecting its interests while staying within legal bounds. The strategy was subtle but effective, a mix of economic pressure and strategic signaling. First, China suspended negotiations on new projects with Panama. This wasn't just a pause. It included port logistics, energy, and infrastructure projects that were either in the pipeline or under discussion. By delaying agreements, China sent a clear message. Panama's actions have real consequences for future investment. Over time, these pauses can stall development, reduce revenues, and create uncertainty for local stakeholders. Next, China began encouraging domestic shipping companies to reroute cargo away from Panama where feasible. This isn't an outright ban, but it subtly shifts trade flows. Shipping companies naturally adapt to minimize risk and cost, meaning Panama could gradually lose some of its Chinese clientele, which makes up a significant portion of port activity. Think of it like a river slowly being diverted. At first, the change is small, but over time the main flow moves elsewhere. Agricultural exports also became a tool. China tightened inspections and market access for Panamanian goods. Bananas, coffee, tropical fruits, and seafood, all products with short shelf lives and tight profit margins. Even slight delays can lead to spoiled goods, lower prices, or unsellable produce, directly affecting farmers first, then the broader economy. This shows how even lawful measures can create real-world pressure without crossing into sanctions. The combined effect of these moves is a quiet but persistent pressure campaign. Panama's ports face declining operational efficiency, potential revenue loss, and weakened attractiveness to foreign operators. Without a stable base of Chinese trade, jobs, handling efficiency, and regional competitiveness could gradually deteriorate. In short, China turned the legal seizure into an economic chessboard, forcing Panama to reckon with the consequences of its decision, while preserving options for future cooperation if the situation is resolved. Panama's port seizure and China's measured retaliation reveal a bigger picture. How small countries can become pawns or pressure points in global power struggles. On the surface, Panama is just a nation of 4 million people controlling a narrow strip of land, but its geographical position and control over the Panama Canal make it a strategically vital choke point. In other words, its actions have consequences far beyond its borders. For small economies like Panama, this incident highlights a fragile balancing act. They rely on foreign investment, trade partnerships, and global goodwill to sustain growth. Yet when superpowers like the United States and China exert pressure, these small states can quickly find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. One decision, revoking a contract, siding with one power, can trigger economic disruption, diplomatic tension, and political fallout. There's also a ripple effect in global trade patterns. Shipping companies may start rerouting cargo, alternative ports may gain business, and infrastructure projects could be delayed or canceled. Panama isn't the only country vulnerable. Other nations with strategically important assets or heavy dependence on foreign investment may face similar dilemmas in the future. The case also signals a shift in Chinese economic assertiveness. Instead of immediate confrontation, China is demonstrating how to use lawful, economically impactful measures to protect its interests. It's a lesson in soft power applied through commerce and trade networks, showing that influence doesn't always require direct military or legal force. Finally, the incident raises questions about United States influence and strategic control. Can Washington still shape outcomes around key assets like the Panama Canal? Or are small states increasingly able to leverage great power rivalries to assert their own agendas? The answers will shape the next decade of trade, infrastructure investment, and international diplomacy. The Panama Port Saga is more than a legal dispute. It's a vivid example of how geopolitics, economics, and national sovereignty collide. Decades of Chinese investment, over $4 billion and nearly 30 years of work, can be threatened almost overnight by a legal ruling influenced by global power dynamics. Panama, a small country with outsized strategic importance, suddenly finds itself navigating the treacherous waters between the United States and China, while trying to protect its own economy and citizens. China's measured retaliation, slowing negotiations, rerouting cargo, tightening agricultural inspections, is a subtle yet powerful reminder that economic leverage can shape outcomes without firing a single shot. For Panama, the immediate effect is clear project delays, economic pressure, and uncertainty for its ports and exporters. For the global community, it's a warning that small states with strategic assets are highly exposed to superpower competition. Looking ahead, questions abound. Will Panama manage to balance its sovereignty with international pressures? Could this incident inspire other small nations to reconsider foreign partnerships? And on a larger scale, is this part of a new era where China asserts its economic influence through calculated, lawful pressure rather than overt confrontation? For viewers, this story is a reminder. Geopolitics isn't just about armies, it's about infrastructure, trade, and leverage. Every shipping route, port, and canal carries hidden power and influence. If you want to stay informed about global trade, infrastructure conflicts, and geopolitical developments, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll continue to break down the moves shaping the world economy and show you how events like Panama's port decision ripple across the globe.